when one company becomes so powerful that no other competitor can even survive in the same market. Let's look at this in today's videos. Hi friends, welcome to Econverse. I'm Abrar and I'm a student who topped in my GCSE Economics last year in Oman. On this channel, we make learning economics simpler, clearer and hopefully a lot more fun. In this video, we are going to be looking at monopolies. Let's get started. We are looking at monopolies. So let's get straight into it. Let's start off with the characteristics of a monopoly. So what is a monopoly? A monopoly is a single seller firm. So let's start off with characteristics. First characteristic of monopoly is that the firm equals the industry, or the firm is the industry. The firm is basically the same as the whole market. Number two, we said that perfectly competitive markets have firms as price takers, but in this case firms are price makers. They set the price. There is no close substitutes, and we talked about how there is freedom to entry and exit in a perfectly competitive market. In this market there is barriers to entry and exit, and there is full control over supply in the case of a monopoly. Full control over the supply. And now let's look at the behavior of a monopoly. So the behavior of a monopoly is essentially that they earn supernormal profits, which we'll look at in terms of a diagram soon. Supernormal profit, and there's firms entering restricted. Now there are barriers of entry that are used in order to restrict the firms. Now barriers of entry could be, like for example, key resources are only owned by one firm. They can be legal barriers by the government, or they can be so much of economies of scale by one firm that it simply drives the other firms out of the market. Then there is full control over price and supply. Since there's full control over price and supply, essentially it simply has full dominance over the market. And in this case, to increase the quantity, the firm needs to reduce price in order to sell out. Obviously needs to lower its prices, so there is a high chance that they do some hoarding and they limit the supply. Now we need to look at the profit diagram in a monopoly. So when we have a monopoly, this is the diagram for profits. Okay, so yet again, on the vertical axis we have the cost, and on the horizontal axis we have the quantity. So in this case, the average cost curve can be drawn somewhat like, just a second, I'll just draw that again, like that. So that is your average cost curve, and then you have your average revenue that is somewhere there. This your average revenue, this your average cost, and essentially this is your break even. Break even is when your total revenue equals your total cost, or your average revenue equals your average cost. And this point, this whole space between here to here, is your profit. And let me tell you this is supernormal profit. This basically means, so if you can notice one important feature of this, the average revenue is downward sloping. Why is it downward sloping? This is downward sloping because firms are price makers, they are not price takers. They set their prices. So essentially the firm goes on to make supernormal profits, or really high profits in the long run. Now when we look at monopolies, it is important to understand the advantages of monopolies. The advantages of monopolies are the following. So the advantages, number one advantage of monopolies are that there is really high price and there is really high profit. Then there's low competition, which is a big advantage. So there's complete dominance in the market by that one firm. And then there is control over prices and quantity, and there is no close substitutes. And then when we look at the disadvantages part, we need to understand that some of the disadvantages are quite much more on the consumer than the firm. Firstly, there is so high prices. All this can take a toll on consumers. Then there's low choice for consumers. They have to buy that from that one firm. And last but not the least, there is monopolistic exploitation of customers. Now, what I mean by monopolistic exploitation, let me give you an example. One example of monopolistic exploitation could be something called hoarding. Hoarding is when you limit the supply of something that is really important. This drives up the prices, essentially exploits customers, making them pay higher. Now, this is especially effective in the case of necessities. So, an example of this in the real world is OPEC, which is the oil and petroleum, which is the organization of petroleum exporting countries. So, they restricted the supply, they hoarded the supply of oil, which led to the 1973 oil crisis. And this essentially led to a global recession and high inflation in the economy. What used to be $3 per barrel went on to become $12 per barrel for petrol. So this shows how monopolies can essentially exploit their customers, creating devastating consequences for consumers. So that's it for monopolies.
If you think this video helped you understand economics better, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join the Econverse. Because on this channel, you will find the complete GCSE Economics library. And as I've promised, I've finished all the microeconomic content in GCSE so far. And moving on from next week, we will be looking at macroeconomic content. See you again next week.